Welcome to the Kansas Senate Commerce Committee. Glad to have everyone here today. I will open the hearing on House Bill 2292, enacting the Kansas Apprenticeship Tax Credit Act, and we will have an overview from our reviser, Charles.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. House Bill 2292 enacts the Kansas Apprenticeship Tax Credit Act. It establishes a tax credit program for Kansas businesses that employ apprentices in Kansas, and of course, in accordance with federal and state law, registered apprenticeship programs. These programs would likely be administered by the Office of Registered Apprenticeship of the Department of Commerce. So I guess there are sort of three programs that are included in this bill. The first is the tax credit program for for-profit businesses, which was part of the original bill. And then the House Committee on Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development amended the bill to include an apprenticeship grant program for nonprofit employers, including nonprofit healthcare employers, and also included for-profit eligible healthcare employers within the definition of eligible employer. So sort of the focus of that amendment on the House side was healthcare organizations, but the grant program would include any nonprofit organization. The House Committee of the Whole added a grant program for school districts, specifically for apprenticeships and education expenses to train licensed teachers. And so starting with the definition section 2, we have a definition of apprentice. You know, that again, that's in accordance with state and federal law and regulations. A definition of eligible employer, that's defined as a business with a physical location in Kansas, authorized to conduct business in Kansas and subject to Kansas income tax. And as I've noted, with respect to all of these programs, the grant programs and the tax credit program, the apprentice must be employed pursuant to a registered apprenticeship agreement and in accordance with a registered apprenticeship program. And those are both defined terms and involve compliance with federal law and regulations, and also reviewed by the Secretary of Commerce. The House Committee on Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development, as I mentioned, amended the bill to include some additional definitions for eligible nonprofit employer. That would be a 501c3 organization with a physical location in Kansas. Eligible healthcare employer, as I mentioned, a hospital, long-term care facility, or federally qualified healthcare center with a physical location in Kansas, engaged in providing healthcare to Kansas residents. To be eligible for the tax credit, the eligible employer must employ an apprentice pursuant to an agreement with the Office of Apprenticeship of the or rather with the Secretary of Commerce, and the agreement requires a number of items. It requires the employer to provide information to the Office of Registered Apprenticeship of the Secretary of Revenue. Requires the employer to enter into an agreement with specified conditions, including possibly, specified employment or training goals or any other conditions. No credit is to be awarded unless the Office of Registered Employment of the Secretary of Commerce has certified to the Secretary of Revenue that the eligible employer has met the requirements for the credit. So there are sort of two credits. One is for tax years 2023 through 2025. These are, the original bill with respect to the first credit, tax years 2023 through 2025, provided that the eligible employer had to employ the apprentice during the calendar year preceding the taxable year for which the credit was claimed, for at least 7 consecutive months. And that was amended by the House Committee to replace that with a requirement that the employment be for all or a portion of the probationary period as defined for that apprenticeship pursuant to the federal regulations and law. And the eligible employer who employed the apprentice when the probationary period was completed would get the tax credit. In addition, subsequent credits can be claimed for up to 3 successive calendar years after the date on which the probationary period of the apprentice was met by any eligible employer who subsequently employs the apprentice. The House Committee also expanded the time frame permitted for employment of an apprentice and receipt of the tax credit to also include employment of an apprentice and receipt of the credit by the employer within the same taxable year. The amount of the credit is up to $2,500. It's determined by a scale that is to be developed by the Secretary of Revenue in consultation with the Office of Registered Apprenticeship. Scale is based on a range of wages and expenditures with corresponding tax credit amounts. The second part of the tax credit is for years 2026 and thereafter, and that's Section 3B of the bill. For that tax credit, the eligible employer must employ the apprentice for a continuous period constituting at least 25% of the apprenticeship time period required by the Registered Apprenticeship Program. And this credit is taken in the tax years succeeding the calendar year in which the employment requirement is met, and that may be taken in successive tax years based on employment for a full year for up to 4 successive calendar years of employment for each apprentice. The amount of the tax credit with respect to this tax credit provision is a little bit more. It's up to $2,750 for each apprentice employed, and an employer can receive up to 20 of those credits for employment of 20 apprentices in a taxable year. And the Office of Registered Apprenticeship has some discretion to authorize a credit for employment less than a full calendar year. There's also an additional tax credit provision in Section 3C. This is for if the apprentice is enrolled in a secondary or post-secondary career and technical education program, is at least 18, and has been employed by the eligible employer for at least 90 days, and also is participating in specified apprenticeship and other programs listed on page 3. These programs include the Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Act, an Adult Basic Education and Literacy Program, or a Public Workforce Program that are funded under the Federal Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. The additional credit is for $500, and an employer may not claim more than 10 such credits per tax year. So there are some terms, requirements, and aggregate amount limitations for all tax credits. You can see those in Section 3D of the bill. The credits are not refundable. They are not transferable. In the bill as introduced, the cumulative amount of all tax credits for eligible employers per tax year was limited to $7,500,000. This was amended by the House Committee to accommodate the grant program that they added for nonprofit employers. They retained the aggregate limit for tax credits at $7,500,000 each taxable year, but they added a total aggregate limit which would include all grants issued pursuant to nonprofit employers issued in pursuant to that added nonprofit apprenticeship grant program to $10 million each taxable year. So the total aggregate limit, $10 million each taxable year, $7,500,000 for tax credits, and the excess for the grants. There's a provision on Section 3E that provides participation of an employee in an apprenticeship program is not to constitute union affiliation unless the employee elects to affiliate with a union. There's a provision for reports to the legislature by the Office of Registered Apprenticeship to the House Committee on Commerce and the Senate Committee on Commerce. I would add that the House Committee amended this provision to also include information in the reports pertaining to the added nonprofit apprenticeship grant program. So with that program is primarily in Section 4 of the bill. It's, like I mentioned, it's intended particularly to facilitate apprenticeships for healthcare organizations, but it would also apply to any nonprofit organization. It provides the Secretary of Commerce can develop and administer the program. The grants are for the purpose of covering administrative costs and program development costs associated with meeting the federal requirements of a registered apprenticeship program that would fall to that organization. It's similar to the tax credit program for for-profit employers. An agreement is required with the secretary. The organization must employ the apprentice for the same periods of time, and the secretary may require program development, employment, or training goals by the nonprofit employer. Grants may be awarded up to $2,750 per apprentice per taxable year, not to exceed 4 successive years. Grants are limited to 20 per eligible nonprofit employer. And the secretary is to develop application procedures and grant award terms, conditions, and criteria. And also, this section provides the secretary to consult with state agencies, institutions, nonprofit organizations, and associations, private healthcare associations, nonprofit Kansas healthcare providers, and other appropriate entities in developing the grant program criteria and priorities. There's a fund created in this section subject to appropriation acts. The bill provides for $2,500,000 to be transferred to the fund from the state general fund each July 1st, starting in 2023. Any unexpended balance carries over to next year. As I mentioned previously, the aggregate amount of all grants plus the aggregate amount of all tax credits per taxable year is not to exceed a total of $10 million. The House Committee of the Whole amended the bill to add a grant program for high school districts, specifically for apprenticeships for paraeducators or other employees of the district who would like to become licensed teachers. And of course, the aim of this is to increase the number of licensed teachers in the state. You can see this program on sections 5 and 6 of the bill. This program has similar requirements with respect to meeting federal and state requirements for apprentices and registered programs. This program is a little bit different in that the Commissioner of Education, the State Board of Education, and the Secretary of Commerce are to coordinate in both developing and administering the program, and also to obtain approval of the program under federal law, because apprenticeships for teachers is something that's a little bit new. It has been approved in some state, in I think at least Tennessee, but it is sort of a new apprenticeship kind of program. The bill requires the State Board of Education, in coordination with the Secretary of Commerce, to adopt rules and regulations to implement the program on or before March 1st, 2024. The way the program works is an applicant school district applies, well, first of all, they're required to enter into a partnership with at least one, the term in the bill is eligible related training instruction provider, which is basically an institution of higher education as defined in the bill. You can see that definition in section 5. And then to identify candidates, and candidates, as I mentioned, are paraeducators or other employees of the school district who want to become teachers. Grant funds are then used for payment of the apprentice's tuition at the institution of higher education to get their degree, and also for wages for their apprenticeship. The maximum grant amount is $2,750 per year for 4 years per apprentice, or the time can be extended if it takes longer to obtain the teaching degree. There's a prioritization for grants to school districts that partner with educational institutions with flexible learning models so that the apprentice or teacher trainee can continue their employment while they are getting their education and training. Grants are also to be awarded in an equitable manner geographically within the state. There is a provision that the Commissioner of Education, the State Board of Education, and also the Secretary of Commerce are to annually evaluate the program, report to the Senate Committee on Education and Commerce and the House of Representatives Committees on Education and Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development. So the funding for this program is $3 million from the State General Fund to a new fund that's set up in the bill. $3 million each July 1st, starting in 2023. And again, unexpended funds remain in the fund for use in the next fiscal year. That's, of course, subject to appropriation acts, as is everything else. The bill passed the House 115-7. If passed, it would become effective July 1st, 2023.
Thank you, Charles. Questions for Charles? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I am struggling here on the dollar amounts. I keep seeing all kinds of dollar amounts all throughout the bill. In Section 3, on page 4, I see 7.5 million. Just a few sentences further on page 5, I see 10 million. And then we go to Section 4, I see 2.5 million. In Section 6, I see 3 million. And it looks like the Secretary of Commerce has a lot of clout in where all these funds are going. So I don't know if this, Madam Chairman, would be for the reviser or for you or for a fiscal note, because I'd like to know what the total amount is when I see 7.5, 10 million, 2.5, 3 million. Are we adding all those figures together for a fiscal note, or are we? Do you have an answer?
Yes, I can answer that question. So with respect to the tax credit program, which was originally in the bill, plus the grant program for nonprofits, which was added by the House committee, the aggregate total limit is 10 million per taxable year. That includes 2.5 million for the grant program and 7.5 million for the tax credits. So the total limit, 10 million per tax year for those two programs. With respect to the educational grant program for teachers, that's additional. That would be an additional, if fully funded, subject to appropriation acts, of 3 million.
So if I may, Madam Chairman, did I hear then 13 million?
Correct.
Okay. And a lot of this money is carried forward year to year to year. If it's appropriated at the maximum amount but not used at the maximum amount, it looks like that the funds remain credited to the fund for the use of the succeeding fiscal year, which means if, Madam Chairman, if the Secretary or whomever makes these determinations, if you will, sort of holds back, then in 1 year they would have a bigger pile of money that they could hand out.
Yes, you are correct that both funds provide for, if there's any unused funds at the end of the fiscal year, to be carried over.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Any other questions? Senator Schallenberger.
Thank you. So the grant program, the grant program for schools goes to the school district?
Yes.
So they get paid money to hire somebody?
Yes, the grant amount is designed to go toward the tuition of the candidate who is wanting to become a teacher, and also for paying wages of that candidate during their apprenticeship.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, thank you, Charles. We will turn our attention to our proponent testimony. We will limit testimony. We do have 2 bills to do today, so we will limit testimony to 3 minutes each. So we will start with Shonda Anderson Atwater, Director of Apprenticeship and Internship, Kansas Department of Commerce. Welcome, Shonda.
Thank you so much. I apologize, I have a bit of a cold. Senators, it's an honor to come before you and testify in a proponent for this bill. The Kansas Department of Commerce supports House Bill 2292, the Kansas Apprenticeship Tax Credit, and requests the Senate Commerce Committee pass the bill favorably. While registered apprenticeship in the state of Kansas is steeped in history, the Office of Apprenticeship is now experiencing much-needed modernization and growth. These modernizations will have lasting impacts on established programs, their program sponsors, the intermediaries, and stakeholders that are vital to the occupational proficiency in the state's most in-demand industries. Most apprenticeship occupations in Kansas have traditionally been in the construction and electrical trades. These trades are vital to the economy, and their apprenticeship training is robust, demanding, and extremely well-rounded, producing some of the country's top professions in their occupations. However, it is due to labor shortages and an increase in economic activity across all industries that have influenced Kansas to rethink how apprenticeship could be offered to other occupations such as healthcare, education, IT, manufacturing, and agriculture. Based on data reported by the U.S. Department of Labor, Kansas has clear areas of growth opportunity. To meet these significant needs in high-demand, high-wage occupations and continue down the path of modernization and growth, the Kansas Office of Apprenticeship supports a tax credit for an employer that employs an apprentice. This benefit will encourage all employers to implement apprenticeship programs as a strategy to develop a qualified workforce. The credit will also be available to those employers who already have established apprenticeship programs or are working with an established apprenticeship program, including joint apprenticeship training committees. The purpose of this tax credit is to support the increase of registered apprenticeships throughout the state. Additionally, both the amount per apprentice and the overall cap on the program is comparable to what other states offer. This program will put Kansas in alignment with other states. Currently, 31 states offer an apprenticeship tax credit. As we work diligently to grow our workforce and reduce the skills gap. Kansas has been recognized as the best state in the nation for business investment per capita. To continue our economic success, the state needs to improve, further innovate, and provide opportunities for all Kansans to have high-quality jobs. Registered apprenticeship provides those opportunities. In addition to the tax credit, the bill creates two grant programs, the Kansas Nonprofit Apprenticeship Grant Program and the Kansas Educator Registered Apprenticeship Grant Program. The nonprofit grant program would provide a grant of $2,750 per apprentice to any nonprofit employer or nonprofit healthcare provider per taxable year. Similarly, the Kansas Educator Registered Apprenticeship Grant Program would provide a grant of $2,750 per educator apprentice to the applicant school.
Shonda, thank you so much. Your time is up. Are you able to stay for questions?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful, thank you. Committee, we will hold questions till all of the proponents have testified. Next, we have Eric Stafford, Vice President of Government Affairs, the Kansas Chamber. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. Good morning, Eric Stafford, Vice President of Government Affairs with the Kansas Chamber. I apologize, I forgot my iPad, so I'm going to just do this with the laptop today, which is kind of weird, but it works. If you recall, earlier this session, we presented on our workforce development report and policy considerations that the state should look at to help improve the workforce dynamics of the state and systems and processes in Kansas. And one of those recommendations was to establish a registered apprenticeship tax credit, which House Bill 2292 does. Page 2 of our testimony, you'll see where we kind of stack up in terms of registered apprenticeships, and the performance is not well. They've largely been underutilized, and the focus here would be to bring more attention to the value of registered apprenticeships for both employees and employers. And obviously, the creation of the Office of Apprenticeship under the Department of Commerce was a significant step in the right direction by Governor Kelly to provide more awareness to the employer community on the value that apprenticeships provide. So all that said, the one comment I'd like to make based on changes from the House So the healthcare community came to us and asked, hey, for this registered apprenticeship where we don't have income tax liability because we're nonprofits, can we add some sort of grant program to create an apprenticeship grant system equitable to a tax credit for healthcare workers? Said, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this isn't intended to be targeted toward any specific industry or exclude any specific industry, because we all know that they have struggles of staffing and finding workers, and the value of apprenticeships is getting on-the-job experience while also experiencing pay raises as you move through the apprenticeship process. So that nonprofit grant was added in the House committee. And then on the floor, the educator piece was added. And the request we'd like to have today, adding that educator piece to Senator Peck's questions about the dollar amounts, takes about $3 million away without adjusting the total cap and leaving that in place. So the total cap initially was $7.5 million, and then they added $2.5 million for the healthcare grant to make it 10, but then they added another 3, but left the cap at 10. So really, we're only looking at about $5.5 million statewide for apprenticeships for the non-grant industries. And so we would just ask that this committee consider potentially modifying the total cap to reflect the educator component that was added on the House floor. Fully supportive of that provision too. Again, just like healthcare, from the education standpoint, there's value to providing registered apprenticeships in the education community as well. So that would be our only addition or comment that we would have. But ultimately, we feel this bill would be a great step for the state and for the workforce in the state of Kansas. And I'm happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Eric. Committee, next we have Cassie Gilmore, Kansas State Council of Society for Human Resource Management. Welcome, Cassie.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Erickson and honorable committee members. It's a privilege to appear before you today on behalf of the Kansas Society for Human Resource Management. For those of you that are unfamiliar with SHRM, it's a professional organization comprised of 2,300 HR professionals in the state of Kansas. Kansas SHRM serves the needs of HR professionals and advances the interests of the HR profession throughout the state. Our members are responsible for developing and implementing workplace policies and practices that comply with federal, state, and local laws and provide guidance to managers at all levels about fair and effective people management practices. Our members serve in the public and private sectors and represent unionized and non-unionized businesses of all sizes. Kansas SHRM is committed to assisting our HR members and Kansas employers with addressing the workforce shortages across Kansas. Last fall, we partnered with the Office of Apprenticeship and SHRM, our national organization, to promote a federally accredited HR apprentice program, HR WRAP. In partnership with our local SHRM chapters, Kansas SHRM is actively working across Kansas to educate employers on the process and benefits of establishing HR apprenticeships at their work sites. Once apprentices are enrolled, our Kansas SHRM chapters are committed to providing support for the apprentices, including peer mentoring, assistance with curriculum, and other support services to help apprentices successfully complete the HR WRAP program. On behalf of Kansas SHRM and its members, I'm here to provide support for House Bill 2292, which would enact the Kansas Apprenticeship Tax Credit aimed at encouraging the development of apprenticeship programs in Kansas through income tax credits and grants for participating businesses that employ apprentices. This incentive would be a great tool for Kansas SHRM to discuss with Kansas employers as they consider sponsoring an apprenticeship program. Currently, there are 30 states that offer some form of an apprenticeship incentive, including Missouri, Iowa, and Colorado. Adding Kansas to this list would be a positive step towards assisting employers with innovative ways to address our workforce shortages. Kansas SHRM is committed to helping the HR profession grow in Kansas through a local, state, and national partnership. Passage of House Bill 2292 will assist us in ensuring success, and on behalf of Kansas SHRM, I respectfully request that you favorably consider House Bill 2292. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassie. Appreciate it. Committee, that is the end of our proponent testimony. Questions. We will start with Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could start with Commerce first, please.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for being here today. So just so I understand, does the state of Kansas currently offer any sort of apprentice tax credit?
No, no, sir.
Okay. And you guys have decided you want to direct this one to employers, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And just so I understand, have you thought through how if we actually had an employer-granted tax credit for apprentice programs, is that going to have any sort of impact, pro or con, to our technical schools, like we've made this investment in the Promise Act? What's that going to do to those institutions?
Sure. So a registered apprenticeship program has 5 main components per federal law. It includes on-the-job training, related technical instruction, wage progression, mentorship, and stackable credentials. Ideally, we have registered apprenticeship programs that already segue directly with the community college and technical colleges. So this is in an effort to sort of help boost those businesses to offset some of their costs to engage directly with the community college and technical colleges. Remember, a registered apprenticeship program is not a training program to get a job. It's actually a W-2 paid position day one that incorporates that related technical instruction throughout the entirety of the program.
Okay, and then some follow-up questions, Madam Chair, for her and other conferees. So, and when I'm asking you this, it's more than just my legislator hat on, it's my small business owner hat on, okay, who faces staffing problems himself. My next question would be then is that, you know, you realize we have an overall labor shortage.
Yes, sir.
We just can't find people.
Yes, sir.
How is an employer apprentice tax credit supposed to address that problem?
So a registered apprenticeship program is a system to help train up both designed to train up specifically skilled needs specific to employer needs in a region. It can also be developed to help create pathways for people who have barriers to employment. So another population that we haven't considered before in the employment space. The tax credit, there's a lot of quivers for an apprenticeship program, a lot of reasons that a business would engage in this. The tax credit is just another one of those opportunities to help make it easier for a business to engage in the registered apprenticeship space.
And follow-up question, and then one for another conferee. So I guess I'm going to throw back to you. It seems to me that this is an inefficient way potentially, and maybe it's because I just don't understand, but it seems to me this is an inefficient way to basically provide technical skills. It seems to me that if you're basically incentivizing every company out there with similar industries and similar business models do their own apprentice stuff, and you're going to compensate that for them, it just seems like to me a more efficient use of taxpayer, because these are subsidies, make no mistake about it, basically having those employers go through the technical schools and basically being sure that the state is focusing those investments on that. And Madam Chair, I have a question for for Chamber, if appropriate.
Yes. Eric?
Morning, Senator.
Good morning. Thanks for being here. So just help me out with this. Why, just make the case for why employers need this subsidy on top of the investments that the state is making on the technical schools, the other things that we offer through our institutions. And does the business community have any concerns that we would be in fact diluting the effectiveness of our technical schools by offering these tax credits directly to employers? Thank you.
Sure. Good questions. First one, I think that the reasoning behind it is to help offset the costs associated with establishing and maintaining a registered apprenticeship program for the employers. And so, but to your second question, in terms of does it dilute the value of technical colleges and community colleges, no, I think the employer community recognizes the value that those schools offer and currently partner with them today. But, you know, education and training aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, but they're also not necessarily totally meshed either. So there's value in both options and opportunities for employees, gaining an associate's degree or training, the basic training at the technical colleges or community colleges, and then advancing into employment and a registered apprenticeship program where then they have more upward mobility than they would have if there was not a registered apprenticeship.
We're going to move on to Senator Schallenberger.
You can answer this, I hope. Okay. So walk me through this. I'm an employee, potential employee, and you're my employer. You have to have an apprenticeship program for this to work, for you to get this.
For the tax credit, correct.
And
registered with the state and federal government.
And so I walk in, and I've not done anything, but I walk in, you can put me in that program.
Yes. Yeah, if you have the interest and desired career path, yes. There's no employee requirements. It's, based on what.
Well, I bet you will be. If you get a tax credit, you're going to want to walk everybody through this.
Well, I mean, everybody who would be performing the duties of the jobs that would qualify under the registered apprenticeship, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Committee, I am going to make the statement that I heard the revisor say that it was a $10 million for the tax credit and the grants, and that the education piece was an additional $3 million on top of that. So we're going to make sure we have clarification on exactly the fiscal note on this if and when we work the bill. So we will get clarification on that. So committee, seeing no other questions, we're going to close the hearing on House Bill 2292 and turn our attention by opening the hearing on House Bill 2173, ensuring that refrigerants that are approved for use under federal law may be used in Kansas. I think this is a little bit shorter, so we will start with a briefing from our revisor, Charles.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. House Bill 2173, as Madam Chair indicated, it would prohibit building codes or any ordinances, resolutions, rules, or regulations of any political subdivision as defined in the bill, including cities, counties, or state agencies, from prohibiting or limiting the use of refrigerants that are approved and listed by federal law. If the equipment containing the refrigerant is used and installed in accordance with federal law, including any safety standards or use conditions. So what federal law we're talking about here is a portion of the amended Clean Air Act of 1990 and regulations of the Environmental Protection Agency pertaining to that law. And the federal law provides that to the maximum extent practicable, that certain Class 1 and Class 2 substances are to be replaced by chemicals and alternative manufacturing processes that reduce overall risks to human health and the environment. And certain refrigerants are included in chemicals and substances that are regulated under these provisions. So the federal law provides it's unlawful to replace these Class 1 or Class 2 substances, including these refrigerants, with any substitute that the EPA has determined may present adverse effects to human health or the environment. And if the EPA has identified an available alternative that reduces such overall effects and risks. And so the EPA publishes lists of substitutes and safe alternatives, and certain substances are approved subject to use conditions or narrowed use limits. So again, the effect of the bill is that if a city or county cannot prohibit the use of these refrigerants that are on a list approved by the EPA.
Thank you. Questions for Charles? Seeing none, we will begin proponent testimony. Andrew Weens on behalf of the Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration Institute. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you. Morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Andrew Weens, and I am speaking on behalf of the Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration Institute today in support of House Bill 2173. AHRI represents more than 330 manufacturers of air conditioning, heating, commercial refrigeration, and water heating equipment. Here in Kansas, the U.S. HVAC industry supports more than 11,000 jobs. As referenced earlier in the revisor explanation, in 2020, Congress passed and then President Trump signed the AIM Act, the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act, which essentially directs the U.S. EPA to issue rules that will phase down current refrigerants and advance to the next generation refrigerants. This allows for an orderly transition to these refrigerant technologies, many of which are made in the United States. Importantly, the federal legislation does not require the transition from currently used refrigerants until the end of the equipment's useful life. Our manufacturers face a challenge in getting this federal legislation essentially adopted in all 50 states. So efforts are underway to do so here in Kansas and across the country. Legislation has been passed in Tennessee, Texas, Missouri, Colorado, Arizona, New York, Washington, several other states. The goal is to get this legislation passed throughout the country. Kansas does not have a state building code, and we're certainly not asking for one today. The legislation itself is pretty simple. It just says that no local building codes or ordinances can prohibit these new refrigerants. And so it doesn't mandate the use of new refrigerants. It doesn't say you have to stop using the old refrigerants. It just kind of solves a timing issue that allows our state to participate with the rest of the HVAC industry across the country. The federal legislation was sort of a grand bargain negotiated agreement between industry and President Trump's EPA, and we believe that this phase down will help create jobs long-term and keep America in the lead in this industry. So with that, I'm happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Andrew. Next, we have Chris Forth, Vice President, Regulatory Code and Environmental Affairs for Johnson Controls, I believe on WebEx. Chris?
Yes, I'm here. Can the committee hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Please proceed.
Yeah, I want to thank the committee for the opportunity to testify today in support of House Bill 2173. As Andrew mentioned, this bill is very important to us. We're a large manufacturer of heating and air conditioning products and several other components throughout the world globally, but we have a very large facility there in Wichita, Kansas. It employs more than 1,000 Kansans, and it is over 1 million square feet. And we also produce more than 1 million units a year, placing Kansas at the forefront of the heating and air conditioning world. This bill for us has a direct impact on jobs in that facility in Wichita. And what's important to us is that we not have to deal with a patchwork of regulations across states and across the country. So passing, 2173 is really important to us, and it does impact, has direct impact on Kansas. So we would appreciate support for the bill and happy to stick around for any questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Committee, we have no other proponents, so we will open it up for questions. Any questions? Seeing none. Oh, I'm sorry. Senator Ware.
Thank you so much. And I'm not sure exactly, I suppose, Andrew. So what happens when the next development of refrigerants comes along? Are we back here again then, or what?
Yeah, good question, Senator. I suppose, I hate to speculate, but I suppose that it will be another issue that Congress takes up and looks at it. I think it's important for the industry that we all move at the same pace in advancing the phase down from current refrigerants to new refrigerants so that you kind of generate some economies of scale over time. You can produce equipment with these new refrigerants, and you have regulatory certainty that when you produce equipment and sell it, that it'll be able to be used across the country. And I think it keeps manufacturing here and leaves us as a leader in this technology. I will say this is not the first refrigerant phase down we've had. There's been many different types of refrigerants that have been used over the years. And so I'm sure there will be future phase downs when the technology gets to the point where it's viable and helps the industry and environment.
Senator Schallenberger.
Thank you, Andrew. So make sure I understand. Baxter Springs has some building codes, and I think we looked at them back in 1972. We haven't updated them. So what you're saying is if I want to build a new building and put in a new heating and air conditioning unit, it may not comply with Baxter Springs building codes. And this says that we can't fine them for using Freon when it's not even allowed anymore.
Yeah, thank you, Senator, for the question. Yeah, essentially, I think it would be great if we had time to go, and run around the state and make sure that all local building codes are updated to reflect, to allow for these new refrigerants to be used. I think with the schedule that the federal government put together, again, the bill was signed late 2020. I think it took about a year for the EPA to come up with rules. And since then, the association that I represent has been going around to all the states trying to get either legislation passed or, make sure that local building codes don't prohibit these new refrigerants. So this language is fairly straightforward and simple, and it says building codes can't prohibit these new refrigerants, so kind of takes care of that issue, across the state. So would allow for these new refrigerants to be used in your county and city.
Seeing no other questions, thank you, Andrew. Committee, we do have a proponent written only by Sean Miller and opponent written only by Jay Hall. And I apologize, I failed to draw your attention on the previous bill 2292 to proponent written only, and there were no neutral and no opponents, so my apologies. So we will close the hearing on House Bill 2173. And committee, I would like to turn our attention to work a bill that we heard last week, House Bill 2042, which is the authorizing towing by self-storage unit operators. Charles, can you give us a quick refresher on that bill?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Yes, this bill would permit operators of self-service storage facilities to have motor vehicles, trailers, or watercraft that are stored at their facility towed when the occupant of the storage space is in default for a period of more than 45 days. The same warning provisions and notice provisions as are currently required for a sale would apply. There would be a lien created on the vehicle when a wrecker comes and tows it away for the wrecking service, for the towing service. The self-service storage operators' lien on the property would be extinguished. And I think that.
Thank you. Committee, I will remind you this bill did pass the House 123 to nothing. What is the will of the committee? Do I have a motion? Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll move that we pass out House Bill 2042 favorably.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Seconded by Senator O'Shea. Discussion on the bill. Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. During the committee hearing on 2042, it was mentioned in the title that it's 45 days. I was not the one that mentioned it, but I appreciate it because I thought 45 days was a rather short time frame. I didn't really prepare any kind of balloon or amendment, but I would be curious if there would be support, and I know we've got a motion on the floor to adjust that, and then during conference, you can visit with the House and determine the correct number of days. But just adding, say, an additional 15 days, which would make it 2 months, 60 days as an example, would be a little more reasonable time frame. I'm thinking, Madam Chairman, if we have individuals who are traveling outside of the country or snowbirds or who knows what might be the case, that if they're in default for 45 days, that's a fairly short period of time. 60, I think, is even a fairly short period of time. But I just thought I would throw that out to see if there's additional discussion, and if you prefer or wish, I could certainly make a substitute motion to amend, or you may not want to handle it that way. But I just thought I would throw that out because the fact there was that discussion during the hearing of the 45 days being rather brief.
Okay. And a substitute motion is in order if you would care to make that.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I will do that then, and this will be,
Just a moment before we do that, I believe Charles might have some clarifying information.
Well, actually, just a request for clarification. So currently, in current law, there is a 45-day, the 45 days applies before you can sell property. So my question would be, do you intend to change the current law with respect to sale of property, or just the 45 days with respect to towing of vehicles, watercraft, and
Madam Chairman, my intent was to change in the title 45 to 60, so I don't know. I can ask the reviser if that would make significant changes throughout statute or just this one particular place, because I'm thinking that if they're to default 60 days, then they could proceed with what 2042 is designed to accomplish regarding towing of the vehicles, the watercraft, whatever else is in the legislation.
Committee, it sounds like, and due to the time, I want to make sure that we get clarification on this. I would ask the maker of the original motion if they would withdraw for the time being, and we will take this up then next week with the additional information on 45 versus 60 days. I'll withdraw. Thank you. Thank you, and Seconder, Senator O'Shea. Thank you. We will withdraw. We will look into that further, bring that back to the committee next week. Seeing no other business before this committee, thank you. We are adjourned.